Imagine a conflict so massive it pulls in countries from all over the globe. We're talking new weapons, the terrifying idea of total war, and millions upon millions of lives hanging in the balance. But how did this global catastrophe actually play out between 1939 and 1945? Well, let's break it down.
All right, to make sense of it all, we're going to break the Second World War into 5 key phases. We'll start with the initial shock of Germany's advance, move to the turning points, and finish up with the war's devastating end and the legacy it's left on our world.
So, the war kicked off with Germany just absolutely dominating. Their victories were so fast, so effective, it left most of Europe completely stunned and scrambling to react. This first phase was all about German aggression and their revolutionary approach to warfare.
On September 1st, 1939, Hitler announces, "Since 5:45 a.m., we have been returning fire." Sounds traumatic, right? Well, the whole thing was a setup. Nazi Germany had staged a fake attack on one of their own radio stations to create an excuse to invade Poland. In response, Britain and France had no choice but to declare war on Germany just a couple of days later.
And you got to understand, Germany's success wasn't just about having a big army. It was all about their game-changing new strategy, blitzkrieg, or lightning war. After the slow, grinding trench warfare of World War I, this was the polar opposite. It was all about using fast-moving tanks and air power to punch a hole right through enemy lines and cause chaos deep behind them.
And man, did this strategy work. It was brutally efficient. Poland fell in weeks, caught between the Germans from the west and the Soviets from the east. The next year, Denmark and Norway fell, but the real shocker, France. The fall of France in 1940, that sent shockwaves across the world. By 1941, the German war machine looked absolutely unstoppable.
Okay, so up to this point, it's mostly a European war, but that all changes in 1941. This is the year the conflict literally explodes onto the world stage, pulling in 2 massive powers that had, so far, stayed out of the fight.
So you've got 2 huge decisions that year. First up, in June, Hitler completely turns on his ally Stalin and launches this massive invasion of the Soviet Union, Operation Barbarossa. This opens up the enormous, brutal Eastern Front. Then, fast forward to December, Imperial Japan wants to dominate Asia, and they see the U.S. Navy as their biggest obstacle. So they launch that infamous surprise attack on the U.S. fleet stationed at Pearl Harbor.
And just like that, the entire game changes. You've got the Soviet Union fighting for its life, the United States is officially in. This is no longer a regional conflict. This is now a true world war.
So for the first few years, it really felt like the Axis powers were on an unstoppable roll. But then we get to 1942 and 43, and the momentum starts to shift. Big time. This is when the Allies finally start landing some major counterpunches.
And what's wild is that this pushback is happening all over the globe at once. Out in the Pacific, the U.S. Navy cripples the Japanese fleet at the Battle of Midway, basically stopping their expansion in its tracks. Over in North Africa, the Allies managed to corner and capture about 250,000 Axis soldiers. And on the Eastern Front, the Soviets pull off a stunning victory at Stalingrad.
But of all of these, we have to talk about Stalingrad. Because while Midway and North Africa were huge strategic wins, Stalingrad, that was different. That defeat was so complete, so devastating, it absolutely shattered the myth that the German army was invincible. It was a massive psychological blow that they never really recovered from.
And to give you a sense of the sheer horror of that battle, look at this number. An estimated 700,000 people died fighting for just one city. The human cost was just staggering. It was a brutal meat grinder of a battle that really signaled the beginning of the end for the Third Reich.
All right, so the tide has turned. Now the Allies start to tighten the screws. You can think of this final phase in Europe like a giant vice, closing in on Germany from 2 sides at once.
The western arm of that vice, that was Operation Overlord. You probably know it as D-Day. June 6, 1944, the largest seaborne invasion in the history of the world, with Allied troops storming the beaches of Normandy and France. This was the moment the Western Front was finally ripped wide open.
In this quote right here, it might sound a little military textbook, but it perfectly explains the why behind D-Day. For years, the Allies had been reacting to Germany. Now the plan was to grab the initiative, to be the ones calling the shots, and force the enemy to play defense for a change. And it worked.
Meanwhile, over on the Eastern Front, there's a really important point to get.
When the Red Army first stopped the Germans in 41 and 42, they did it pretty much on their own. It was an incredible achievement. But their ability to then go on the offensive, to chase the Germans all the way back to Berlin, that was supercharged by a ton of aid from the West, especially things like trucks and radios that kept their army moving.
So you've got this immense pressure, squeezed from the west and the east. It was just too much. The German war machine, once seemingly unstoppable, was ground down until it finally collapsed. Germany officially surrendered in May of 1945.
So, Germany surrenders, and Europe celebrates, but the war isn't over. Not yet. The fight in the Pacific is still raging, and the way it ends will introduce the world to a terrifying new reality and a legacy we're still dealing with.
You see, while all this conventional fighting was going on, something else was happening in secret. A frantic, high-stakes scientific race called the Manhattan Project. This was the top-secret American-led effort to build a weapon based on nuclear fission, an atomic bomb.
And that project resulted in the atomic bomb. In August of 1945, the U.S. used this new weapon on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The destruction was on a scale nobody had ever seen before. And just days later, Japan surrendered. World War II was finally over.
So, when we look back at this war, it's clear it wasn't just another conflict. It was a complete break from the past. You have the concept of total war, where entire societies are mobilized. You have new technologies that kick off the atomic age. And of course, you have the Holocaust, a systematic genocide so horrific it forced the world to create entirely new concepts like crimes against humanity.
And let's drill down on that idea of total war for a second. It really meant that the line between soldier and civilian blurred. It wasn't just armies fighting. By 1944, more than half of the entire economy in places like Germany and Great Britain was dedicated to the war effort. Your job, your food, your life, it all revolved around winning.
So there you have it. World War II reshaped everything. Our maps, our politics, our understanding of what humanity is capable of, for good and for ill. It was a story of key moments, of tides turning on a single battle. Which brings me to one last question for you to think about. Was it Pearl Harbor pulling in the U.S., the catastrophic German defeat at Stalingrad, or the massive invasion on D-Day? What do you think was the single most important turning point of the war?